Welcome to the next part of our three-part series exploring the Panjwai Massacre of 2012, as seen and experienced by James Alexander and Brandon Chong. It is important to note that the views and opinions expressed by James and Brandon do not represent the opinions or views of the Panjwai podcast. Any retelling or clarification on the account of the hosts are simply for the purpose of clarity and do not reflect our personal opinions. We have gone to great lengths to conceal the identities of others involved, and in no way intend to levy accusations or suggestions of guilt towards any individual. For more information, including a copy of the official 15-6 investigation and other supporting documents, visit www.thepanjwaipodcast.com/massacre.
So we're back for part 3 of our interview with Brandon and James, talking about the back end of this whole Panjwai Massacre, whatever you want to call it, involving Staff Sergeant Bales. So when we left off with you guys last time, you were talking about how when you got back to the U.S., you got off the plane and literally on the tarmac at SeaTac was an officer waiting to give you the no contact orders with Bales, right?
Yeah, they brought us to the terminal. Yeah.
Cool.
And put us into a room and made us explain to us what the no contact orders were, and that we had to sign them essentially.
Yeah. So after you guys got back and you started segueing into the part where the Army is actually building its investigation, what was that like for you guys? I mean, I'm assuming that you weren't just shipped back to your unit, or were you?
Yeah, we were. We literally shipped back to the unit. The two other NCOs that were detained went to separate battalions, but all of us went back to the same company initially, to the Rear D company altogether.
What were the reasons that they gave why those guys were detained?
Alcohol use and I believe lying under oath was one of them.
And they were both bussed down ranks. And then out of the Army by the time of August 2013, when the final verdict came in. So they were out of the Army, and they were given immunity in regards for their testimony as well by the military. So,
well, the one that got bumped down also got a lateral promotion like a month after he got demoted. So there's that as well.
Because Army, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, look at this guy's ERB.
Yeah, right.
He just got home. Look at him. We got to promote him. Yeah, it's like, okay, all right.
Sure.
And one of those individuals was the one that woke you up and then also made the comment in the DFAC, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get back to that here in a little bit.
Yeah.
So you guys are back. You're in your rear detachment, which anybody who's been in a rear detachment knows that fucking blows.
It's purgatory. It was. Yeah. So we get in the van from not to take you back to the airport, but we get in the van. This is how surreal the experience was. We get in the van from the airport. We drive through Seattle traffic. We get to the battalion. Our stuff is in there's a bunch of soldiers there that are unloading our gear for us. Like we're like, okay, this is kind of weird. They do a head count, and then they get us inside to where there's this FRG has set up this little thing inside the battalion classroom, which is like, thank you for your service kind of thing. And it was like posters, and none of us, we're all mostly single soldiers. So we're like, we've never seen any of you before. We have never been to an FRG meeting. We have no understanding who any of you are. We don't know what you know, but we're all in a room and we're like eating cake essentially.
Yeah.
And it was
welcome home.
It was kind of crazy. Yeah. And then they moved us. The first sergeant that was in charge was awesome, in my opinion. And he moved us to the barracks, and we all moved into the same third floor wing of the barracks. So we basically were given rooms that were all right next to each other, isolated away from anybody else with our own floor. For until everyone got back from deployment. So that was like 5 months of that. And that was kind of crazy. But
during that 5 months before everybody came back, what were you guys doing?
Well, initially they fed us a line that, hey, you guys left Afghanistan. It's not your fault. Like what happened is, you weren't associated with all that. All we're going to do is have you guys, getting in shape and going to schools. At this time, I'd been in the Army for about 2 years, so my hopes and dreams had already been crushed. So I couldn't really believe him. And it was 100% not true anyway. Literally, all they had us doing was pulling CQ and doing all these minuscule details.
Sure.
And it was just like the most demoralizing thing because I'd been in the platoon for 2 years. So half of our platoon is still in Afghanistan. And then I'm at home pulling CQ for a bunch of dudes who, were smoking hash or, doing drugs and didn't even deploy. So it was just... I don't know.
Yeah.
And for our civilian listeners, the rear D is rear detachment. So when a battalion deploys forward, they always leave an element back because there's some people that are injured or they're being kicked out of the Army or they're almost on the way out of the Army or people that are coming in and out of the battalions. There's always a very small element in the back, probably a company size, I'd say.
Yeah, I was shocked how many folks it was. I was
it's a decent sized number of people that don't go.
I was like, why aren't you guys in Bellenby? We could have used the help, there's 11 of us, it would have been great if it had 14.
But that rear detachment purpose is like just to handle the stuff at home, to pull CQ and to do all this stuff. But it's usually dirtbags. It's usually the people that, were
found a way out.
They're being kicked out or they found a way out of the deployment and they're hurt or something. So to be part of rear detachment and not being a dirtbag is incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
Because you don't belong in that group, and that group knows that you don't belong with them. So if I were to venture to guess, I would say you didn't hang out a whole lot with your fellow rear detachmates.
Yeah.
No, most of the time we would see them we would stop drinking around 4 a.m. In preparation for PT formation.
Right.
PT formation would start at 06:30, and we would then go and conduct our own squad or platoon PT. We had a platoon sergeant who was supposed to be in charge of us, but we gave him absolutely no respect. And that's one of the shamefully, like we should have treated him much better than we did. I had a personal run-in with him several times, and we should have treated him better than we did. But it was just like, we were projecting all of this stuff onto him, what I mean?
Honestly, I think for a lot of us, we had lost pretty much all respect for NCOs. At least I know I did. After the whole Bells thing, I was just had kind of an authority issue. Now, I'm not saying I was like a rebel without a cause, but I just kind of had an attitude issue towards NCOs for sure, especially the ones on rear D.
Yeah,
right.
That's
and
understandable.
It's therapeutic, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally understandable.
Yeah, it was just like, and we would play basketball during the day sometimes. There's a basketball hoop outside, and right outside of Black Horse Company, and we'd be out there pretty much all day. If somebody wanted to make us do a detail, they knew where to come find us. But other than that, it was like, we kind of leave us alone. And when we first got to the unit, they gave us keys to a TMP van and let us go to the shopette and stuff, and that was amazing. But within 3 days that was gone. So turns out that van was probably just to escort us home, right? Now that you look back on it, right? It's had nothing. It wasn't for us. It was it was to transport us from legally. So
at what point did the vacation end? Did it really start to realize that you were kind of being isolated and
cut it off?
We went on leave and we came back, and then we took a PT test. And I was so mad that we were taking this PT test, and I never had ever cared because I at the time was in really good shape, but I had not been running, obviously.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, then why are we doing this? And had a really hard time understanding why we were doing it. And eventually it was hey, because the Army says you have to have a PT test. I'm like, okay, sure. So we take a PT test, I'm I get counseled because I don't put maximum effort into the PT test. And I'm just all right, I guess I got to just change my tune, or I'm just going to keep getting counseled. It's to the point now where I can't just keep being mad at the Army about this. I have to take I have to take responsibility for my own actions. And that was the change for me, at least. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
sort of. I mean, at some point, you guys started to get singled out for your involvement, not in the actual, obviously you weren't there with him when that happened, but you were there. And they, I think when we were talking before in our pre-interview process, that the unit kind of pushed you away. You guys kind of became pariahs, especially as the trial started to heat up.
Right.
You said they started to split people up, and that as the trial came forward, that you personally felt that your career options had been pretty much eliminated. So you can talk about that kind of stuff, how the Army
Sure.
started to treat you guys leading up to the trial, and what involvement you guys had in the trial.
The unit came home, and the trial was still ongoing.
Right.
Like we like that's what people think, that like this timeline, it like succinctly ends. Like this was an ongoing, overlapping process that would be like a random Thursday. You would have John Henry Brown's assistant come up to you and be like, "Hey, we're doing a meeting in the the battalion classroom or whatever," and she'd be in there and be like asking us questions if we want to like sign sworn statements and like all these kind of like, this would be like a random days, and you would have no like awareness of this. It was just your responsibility just to stay present. Like it was your responsibility to be able to answer these questions at any point in time from anyone.
Yeah.
Some of us, I never went back to BICO. I stayed in HHC in S3 when the unit returned. So I don't know, that maybe were linked to some of the comments that I made in the command climate survey about, what life was like in as being a single soldier in Black Horse Company at the time. But it was, it was definitely a pretty miserable situation for most of us, right? That were lived in the barracks. So,
Right.
I stayed in HHC, and really once the unit came home, that was it. I mean, once those guys returned from Afghanistan, it was, some like we were all broken apart. The squads were, because we, had different task work. So that was really it. But we all had to stay somewhat available for any kind of, legal meetings, whether it was with Colonel Morse, who was the prosecuting attorney, or, like we had a Chong. I don't know if you remember, we had to go over there and meet with them in the room, and they gave us like a debrief and ask us questions, and it's like, where do you want to start? Like what kind of questions do you want to ask us? And they were like, well, we may need to figure out who asked this and that, and it's just like they were just looking for witnesses to something that they already knew that they had all the evidence they needed for. Right. So it's like we were
trying to shore up their case. Right.
There was no reason, like there was no legal reason for us, like as long as we weren't going to say anything like crazy, like they knew, like some conspiracy theory or something like that. Like they knew that, that we were just accessories. They don't need us necessarily to tie the case together. So
at this period of time, was the case at trial, or were they preparing to take it to trial? Because this would be, August 2012.
Yeah. So the Bales didn't get to JBLM until October 2012.
Okay, so he was in Afghanistan that whole time?
No, he was in Leavenworth. So they brought him.
Okay.
Yeah, so they flew him like by like the 16th, I think he was in Leavenworth already.
Okay.
Like March 16th. Like he went straight to Leavenworth. Like it was like So eventually he made it to JBLM in October, but the trial didn't end until August of 2013.
Okay, so that's what I was thinking.
It's just like the whole time we were told we were basically, both sides could interview us if they wanted to. We had to give up our phone number and a phone roster, of course, and that roster was then used to track us down. So yeah.
So you probably couldn't do a whole lot of traveling or do anything during that period of time,
or go to a different unit, or redeploy, or because we were at that point we were more valuable than the mission, which is one of the quotes that one of the great quotes that we got told. You guys are more valuable in the mission right now. You don't need to go. There's no reason for you to go back. One of the other quotes that we got was, we had been in more ticks than the rest of the at the time than the rest of the brigade combined, and so like that was supposed to make us feel better about not staying in Afghanistan. It was just like really, it's really abstract way of thinking, but those are some of the briefings that we got from the higher ups.
So as this kind of time period goes on, and I'm sure it's just here and there, and frustrating that you can't just kind of move on with your life.
Sure.
Did you have opportunities to address your concerns to the investigators about the possible role of other NCOs in the attack?
No. We talked to them, but when we talked to them, nothing further from the CID conversation and the 15-6 conversation went further.
Right.
It was never talked about again stateside. It was never, hey, did you see this guy? What did you see? None of those kind of interviews even happened. They didn't look at any of our videos. They didn't look at any of the stuff that we had collected. They didn't look at any of it. And that's like one of the, because they didn't need to, right? Because the case is such a slam dunk in their mind that, like, because they have they've given immunity to these other NCOs already, who we find out later, like had some knowledge of the killing, right? Like, you can say at what point or how much knowledge, but they had some knowledge that Bales had killed people because he admitted to them earlier in the night that he had done so, right? Like,
right. And that's one thing I think we neglected to mention in the second episode, and when we talked about the timeline of what Bales did, is that Bales left VSP, went to Alcozai first, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Then came
based off the gunshots. We know
Right.
that based off of like the gunshots from the directions from where the ops end said they heard the shots fired first. Yeah.
So then he came back to the VSP after he had been outside the wire, came back in the wire, theoretically rearmed, refitted, and then went back out again.
Right.
Well, before he went back out the second time, he pointed his barrel in one of our other NCO's nose and was like, well, first of all, he said, I went and killed some people. Other NCO
told him
goes,
point blank.
Like, nah, man, what are you talking about? Then he goes, well, smell my barrel. And he puts a barrel of his gun in his nose and he was, take a sniff of this, and then went back out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So somebody knew what he had been doing. Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Some knowledge of the situation. Right.
And then he went back out to the south. And that's where he did, actually, based on, the 15-6, the majority of his killing was to the south.
Right.
Correct. On the second trip. And
11 family members, 11
in one house,
people in one house, right?
Yeah. Which is just completely unthinkable. I mean, and we're not going to go into the details of the 15-6 here because honestly, it's disgusting, and I'm not going to give him any kind of platform for what he did.
Yeah, of course.
But women, children, desecration, just absolutely horrible shit that he did.
Lighting people on fire, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, horrible stuff. And he did it twice. Essentially, he came back in the wire twice.
Right.
And obviously he told that NCO what he did, and I don't know, maybe the NCO didn't believe him or not. But there was obviously some knowledge, and we talked a little bit in the pre-interviews about, and I mentioned in episode 1 that we would give you a chance to kind of tell us what you think happened. So I wanted to give you each separately a chance to tell us what you think happened that night. So, Brandon, why don't you go first?
So honestly, I think that he was a little upset about the IED strike and that he didn't feel we were aggressive enough when it came to that. I know so I don't think it was premeditated. I don't believe, but I do think that he went out the first time with someone else and then came back in and then left again the second time on his own, only because an ANA soldier had seen 2 individuals come in and then, like 15, 20 minutes later, one leave again. And then also just kind of the weird things that were happening in the B hut, with the smells and just kind of the reactions and the things that were said just kind of makes me believe there was more than one person, but I don't have anything concrete to base that on.
And when you say that another person went with him, you're suggesting that it was another American.
Yes, another American, another conventional infantryman.
Another conventional infantryman, and another NCO.
Yes.
And do you think that is something that the Army explored at all?
I would have to say they may have, because this man got immunity. So I just feel like, yes, I do. But I don't think anything came of it.
And for our listeners, that is mentioned in the 15-6 that there was the report from the Afghan soldier of the 2 soldiers returning from outside the wire and one departing. And then that there was also concern amongst the squad that was relayed to CID that they believed that another individual may have been involved. But those are the only 2 references in the entire 15-6 to the potential of a second shooter. There is pretty pronounced third-party reporting, and the link to that will be in the description and also in the show notes, that the Afghans on the scene witnessed multiple shooters. There's no number given from those third-party reportings that came from the local Afghans, just that they reported multiple shooters. That's a kind of a third source suggesting that there was another American or another soldier. They didn't necessarily specify Americans. James, I mean, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, 100% concur with Brandon. To my mind, the way I was thinking, we know that Bales was drinking with the other NCOs that night. We know that they watched DVDs together. We know that they watched the movie Man on Fire together. We know that Bales had multiple weapons on him. It's not beyond the realm of possibility for me to suggest that Bales and another NCO went out to the first village. The other NCO basically acted in a support role while Bales went inside and sort of interrogated the folks. It goes bad. Bales starts killing people. The other NCO freaks out, right? They come back. Hey, we got to go back. We got to go back. We got to go back. Bales, as he's known to have said to Brandon and I multiple times, I can cover up anything. Like, don't worry about it. I got this. Like, that was his whole thing. Put it on my back. That's why I like the reference to the Ruck March stuff early. Like, he would carry the whole 150 pounds if he needed to. You know what I mean? That's just the kind of guy he was. So if he's looking out for someone else that he has a close relationship with, it makes complete sense to me that they went out together, did the killings. The other one gets cold feet. Bale goes, I got you. Don't worry. You go back. You shower. You change. You get ready. And then I'll go out again. And I'll go make a scene, right? Because he didn't burn bodies in Alakoza. He only did that in Najibien.
Right.
You know what I mean? He only acted in a much more heinous way based on the reporting that we have in Najibien, right? So it goes to make you think like it's an easy way for him to like rationalize being more brutal because now he's on his own without somebody else there to like oversee him.
And potentially having some sort of protection mindset that I'm doing this to cover for my buddy.
Exactly. Whereas the first village, the first place they went is one of the closest areas where we had people that we, would interact with. So it's one of the very first compounds. Right. So if you're, going to go to Alakozai, that would be one of the first places you go. Whereas Najibien, it seemed that that's a distance to go. Whereas Western Balambai and other spots were much closer, right? Where they had people. Sure. So it just kind of didn't make sense from that. It's kind of like a distraction to buy time. And that's what I always think about. Like, if you're going to be walking out those roads like that, like those IED, I mean, we found, 5 or 6 IEDs every time we would go out on the roads.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So to walk those roads at night, now part of me also thinks that some Taliban members were killed as well, that they may have hit a house and killed some Taliban members and that those bodies are not reported. So I think that there's a part of this too, that the families reported the killings, but if there are Taliban members sleeping in, empty homes in random places, it's possible that there were more bodies or more victims in the massacre that we just don't know about. You know what I mean?
Sure. So your thought is that he picked a village that was further away,
right, for
the second iteration to buy time.
Absolutely. To make sure that it was like, get rid of, my computer, because that's the first thing he asked for is his computer, right? So he's like looking for things to destroy, like evidence of, his actions. The images he looked at on the computer, it turns out, we learned through the 15-6 were, 20 dead bodies is the image that he kept looking at, So if you think about that, you put that in alone, that's terrible. But you put that in this context, it makes it just, like, wow, this almost seems like this was a mission, right? To get to a certain number, right? And I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's just, to think of all that in context is just,
So if I can, I'd like to summarize your guys' thoughts, and I want to clarify that there is no concrete evidence. No physical evidence that we know of, that we know that exists that proves this, and this is your beliefs based on your experience and observations.
Yeah, and there's nobody
morning,
else. Yeah, there's nobody else in the world that would have those beliefs and observations.
right?
Well.
Yeah, and you're as close to as it gets, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that your belief is that morning that he and these two other NCOs spent the night drinking, partying, whatever, watching movies. At some point, him and NCO X left the base, went to Alakozai, and committed the first round of murders. And that NCO either got cold feet or something, and they came back. That NCO shaved, showered, put on a fresh uniform, put on the patches that on a top that he hadn't worn in months. Basically cleaned himself up into such a fashion that nobody else on the base looked like. No one was dressed like that or that clean or that clean shaven.
He was a sore thumb. Yeah.
Right. So he comes back and does that, and while he's doing that, Staff Sergeant Bales has left again, based on the observations of one of the Afghan Army gate guards, that 2 Americans came in and 1 left. So they came in, NCO X went and did his personal hygiene, Staff Sergeant Bales left again and went back down to the south, to Najabian, where he committed another round of murders, much more worse, at 2 different locations in the south. And it was at that point that his absence was discovered, likely because they were getting reports of an American committing these atrocities. They were getting phone calls, radio contact. Bodies were starting to show up at Zangabad from Alakozai.
The 5 from the first set, yeah.
Yep. So that was probably, at that time, he's still outside the wire. If you look at the 15-6, it was around that time that they started looking for him using the Zangabad PGS balloon, PGSS, which is like a reconnaissance balloon. And they found him. They did find him with that balloon on his way back to Balambi. They did not, as far as I know, they did not catch any images of him doing anything, just his return trip. And that he returned, that this NCOX that was involved, that potentially was involved in the first round of shootings and was the NCO that awakened you guys for the roll call, was involved in securing his belongings.
Right.
And that during the process of his, not debrief, but his reception back to the base, that his clothing was taken off, placed in a plastic bag. Certain of his belongings were burned. Some of his belongings were broken, like the laptop was attempted to be broken.
Right.
He was not handcuffed or anything initially, and that's kind of going back. Part of the story is kind of irrelevant, but as far as you guys see, this NCO, call him NCOX again, was directly involved from your observations.
Absolutely. And also the way he reacted inside of the chow hall, right? Like he immediately said, hey, he did it for you guys. Well, like, what are you talking about? We've just, this is the first time we've heard of this, right? Yeah. And now to say he did it for you guys is basically, it's like telling on yourself, right? Like, it's like, more than you're letting on. Right. And the fact
at the very least,
and the fact that Bales mentions talking to the other NCO, not NCO X, but another NCO, and saying, hey, I killed people, up here, XYZ. Why would he do that? Right. The whole reason to do that is to fabricate the story of, I did this by myself. Right.
Sure.
Like that's like planting the seed that, hey, this was me by myself, and don't even consider anyone else in the scenario. Smell my barrel, is like exactly like to prove that it was just me, right? As opposed to anyone else. Now, I will say most of the forensics have come back that it was just Bales's weapon, but we also don't know if, you could just as easily pass the weapon off, right? It's just a matter of...
There's also been criticism of, there were American investigators were never allowed on that scene.
Yeah, correct.
So they tried. I read in the 15-6, they tried to get American investigators on the scene, but it was determined unsafe, and all of the forensic collection was done by Afghan local police.
Yeah, right.
So
who were scared for their lives and like
sure.
because their vehicle that just they were coming there with like got blown up, or
Right.
they took contact on the way in, or
So I mean, it's safe to say the crime scene wasn't exactly processed by experts. But the going back to the NCOs, so NCO-X, the one that shaved, woke you up, all that stuff, potentially he's the one you believe that may have gone out the wire the first time. The third NCO, the one that was watching movies with them, and the one that Bales held his rifle up to, did you believe that he had any further role other than maybe knowing what was going on or having an inkling that was going on?
I personally just think he may have inclinations, but I don't think he was out there or doing anything like that, part of like a premeditated plan. I personally don't think that.
It's completely out of his personality. He was kind of feckless. Feckless is probably the best way to describe him. So like all talk, bravado, but like no real punch or back up, had no tactical or strategic knowledge, was promoted far too fast, could do nothing other than do PT from 06 to 0630 to 08, and then that was like the marker of him as an NCO, right? So like he was an admin dude at best, and his character suggested exactly that, of someone who would lie in bed and not believe you, right? Because he was. It's just like if you do that to a normal person, I think that they would react much differently than, oh, I didn't wake up or I went back to sleep, right?
I wouldn't have gone back to sleep, but I'm not sure I would have believed him initially either.
Right.
That's just such an outlandish thing to say. Like, who does that?
Well, the smell my barrel thing would have been the tip, but
yeah,
if I got woken up with an M4 barrel in my face, I'd be
I'd be awake for a while for sure. He did something
exactly.
with it.
And it's just, and he was also he was shaking, like visibly shaken. You could see him because he knew how much trouble he was in.
Yeah.
Like you could
now
see.
Both of those NCOs you said they both received immunity. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And was that in return for their testimony?
That's what we're assuming, right? Like
and they both testified in the trial?
Yes. Yeah. And they're both out of the Army by again when the trial ended, right? So
there you go.
Because they were barred from reenlistment, right? So
sure, yeah.
Thankfully.
Now NCO-Y, the one that we don't believe did anything, he's out. But NCO-X, he is a police officer now. Is that correct?
That's what we have been told.
I think we saw it on his Facebook. I think someone came across his Facebook and saw that on there, something like that.
If you get immunity for your testimony, obviously something, right? I didn't receive immunity for my testimony, right?
Sure.
I was, so I clearly I know as much as almost anyone else outside of the people that knew more when the murder started, right? So if
I would consider you like in the second ring. So obviously there's Bales, and then there's a group of NCOs, and then there's you guys.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. Well, obviously the Afghans that were there or witnessed it, but as far as they're concerned, Bales is just an American soldier. They don't know him from Jack or Adam.
Right. And there had been operations at night where small detachments had left to the base previously, right? So like this was not necessarily something that if I was an Afghan soldier, if I saw one soldier leave, yes, that would be alarming. Two, maybe I'm thinking, is there more coming? And then that's why it would take so long for me to like process oh, there aren't any more coming. Oh, okay. What is going on? Instead of just being like completely alarmed by the situation. Right.
But it wasn't uncommon for ODA to run small number missions, 2-3 guys. Yeah.
They would go out and support SEALs sometimes that we would stay back. There would be other special operators in the area that they would go and support, and they'd be like doing cordons for, or all kinds of stuff like that. There was one particular mission where we had a persistent sniper threat, and basically SEALs came in and stopped the threat. So and our operators basically were sort of like a cordon for that to, because you can see pretty much everything from the op center roof. That was the whole reason for its design. Right. So
these these thoughts in mind about what you thought happened based on what you saw, which is I'll consider it an informed opinion and perspective. That's definitely not just pure conjecture. Did you ever feel like that kind of information was being suppressed, or that the Army investigation didn't want to hear that, and that's maybe why you weren't called as to actually testify at the actual court martial, or why you guys were being kept kind of separate? And I don't know. Did you ever feel like there was a concerted effort to ignore that information, or do you think that they just had their head in their sand, thinking that they got their guy?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I think that the way that Bales is just smart enough. I mean, this is someone that did financial crimes, right? Like, this is not the dumbest person on the planet, despite his actions, right? Like, horrible as they are, he's a pretty intelligent guy at times. And so this is not someone that like is unfamiliar with covering up crimes. So, yeah, I feel like his deceitful nature and actions. Yes, there's no way that the investigators would have just known that without asking us the right questions. And they just never did that. There was no, because they were given, this one guy did it. It was impossible to investigate. There was no forensic evidence, It was just, you just had to go with what the narrative was, which was this single guy did this, which, he did do what I believe most of it, but I believe that other people were involved in the earlier attacks, and it's just a convenient truth, and it's just just to roll it all together and make it one shooter.
Well, I mean, there's understandable international pressure too to close the deal pretty fast.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine what would be worse than putting two people up for trial and only convicting one.
Right.
And that's just pure, conjecture.
Sure.
I have no way of knowing whether that was what was done, but I can see that being motivation.
Complicates things.
It does complicate things.
And it makes the unit look worse, right? Like, it makes it look like this is a cultural thing as opposed to, I mean, it's interesting. It was a command climate survey, right? Like that's what the 15-6 was focused on. Like, what is going on in this climate? How are your troops being treated? That's what the focus of the investigation was.
Sure.
So, that was not a criminal investigation at all, right? That was just a fact finding.
Yeah. So
when they were doing that, they were uncovering things about the way, Bales would treat us, anyone that looked different on the VSP. So it's just.
Now, it has been suggested there was also a racial component to Bale's actions.
Right.
And that he had certain beliefs or positions, straight up saying he was just a racist guy. Was that something that you concur with, or that you witnessed that kind of behavior?
Yeah. I mean, Chong, you were there in the shower when I was singing. I mean, I'm singing in the shower, trying to just imagine I'm not in Afghanistan, right? Like,
sure.
Give me 30 seconds of just closing my eyes, not in Afghanistan, And he comes in and he's just like, "Who's in there singing like a nigger?" And that's like, when he saw it was me, he kind of was like, "Oh, sorry," But it's like, I think if you're already, I mean, that's just one example. This guy was, he openly hated Afghans, had called me a mulatto my first day. Like, we talked about, like, it was just like that's just the environment that we were going into. And he wanted to make it very clear that, like, that's the way it was. He also wanted to make it very clear that he was the one controlling the environment.
Sure.
That, like, it was him. He was going to be the one that made fun of you, not someone else. And you don't want somebody else to racially abuse you because he liked you so much that he wanted to racially abuse you, right? Like, that's the kind of sick twistedness that was going on basically in the 18 months that I knew him.
Do you think that played a role in his decision to commit the murders, or do you think that had more of a role to do with the fact that he was frustrated by the ROE and just the fact that dude's been on 5 deployments, man? Like, eventually people snap. And that's not excusing what he did at all.
Sure. I mean, if you're drunk on steroids, like, if you have that cocktail going through your system and you've been on all those deployments and you have access to a weapon and you feel like you are emboldened or empowered to do something with it, that you feel like you're a protector of these guys for some reason, you know what I mean?
And you're obviously mentally unstable to start with. Before you
Right.
get in the
And
military,
yeah.
you probably got some issues, you know?
Right. And yeah, it's just, and then,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah.
Apparently, he
So,
was having financial issues. He got passed over for E7. Just a whole bunch of
Right.
the steroid
yeah.
use, the alcohol use.
The things he'd say about his wife, just like calling his wife like a
Jesus.
fat cow, like calling his kids ugly, like just unnecessarily mean shit that you don't need to say. Like
Yeah.
that was being said to somehow impress us. It just was,
Yeah.
it was just, yeah, it was just like almost like boasting or jovial, like he wants to joke around a bunch, like have the locker room talk. That's why he joined the military kind of thing, which is, like not why I joined the military, right?
Brandon, did you get any exposure to his kind of racist,
Not to
speech
that
or
extent. I mean, just kind of the typical shoot ragheads, things like that you would kind of hear in the infantry environment. But I never was partial to anything like Alexander was.
Yeah, sure.
General Waddell, the guy who did the 15-6, they're asking me about the race questions, right? And I'm answering the race questions, and one of my answers is like, he's like, "Why didn't you say anything to anybody?" And I'm like, "Who am I gonna tell, man?
Yeah.
My fucking platoon sergeant." You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
who am I gonna tell that my platoon sergeant is racially abusing me? Like my first sergeant, who also, kind of looked like a fucking racist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who was also like in part of the locker room talk, who also, like was, that kind of guy. You know what I mean? Like he didn't step in and like sit there and say, "Hey, we can't. I'm hearing reports of this." No, it's no way. Like he, emboldened these kind of leaders to exist. So he bears some responsibility for it, but like Bale snapped for a lot of reasons, but access to weapons, alcohol, steroids, and then the motive all roll into one, and it's just terrible.
Yeah, man. And I think it's wild to think that your guys' life was so dramatically shifted because of your exposure to this particular situation and this person. And, that's just, it's unfortunate, but, circumstance drives everything.
Yeah.
So as you're leaning into the end of the trial, what did that, how did that take shape? And like, what kind of things were y'all thinking when the conclusion of the trial was kind of drawn to an end? Did you think this is something I can bury and be done with? Is it something that you're going to carry forward no matter what? I mean, what was going on in you guys' mind?
I know for me at the time, I was glad to just have it over and done with, but it's such a unique situation that on social media, almost every 6 months to a year, this dude pops back up trying to, get pardoned or just, writing GQ articles. RPL wrote an article, the team captain wrote an article. So it's almost something that's impossible to escape, even though he was convicted with life in prison. I was watching Stars with that one documentary with the LT from the 82nd who pops up. Bales pops up. Like, this dude is just like all over the place. And I feel like it's hard to escape this dude.
Yeah, it's crazy. I managed to, I stayed in the Army, and I was in Hawaii and I was the VTC for a Mungadai, and one of the officers recognized me. He was the Alpha Company commander, and literally, he was just like stopped and he was like, "Hey man, how are you?" And I'm like, "Hey sir," he's like, he recognized the patch and like asked about Bobby. You know what I mean? Happened in one of my, UW classes. It happened in one of my classes where there's a guy who served in 123. And he was like, "Hey," he found out I served in 2-3. He was like, "Hey, do you know Bobby?" It's like, yeah, unfortunately, I really do, man.
Better
Yeah.
than I'd like.
Yeah, right. And so like I need to get this out to people understand, like this is it'll never go away, it seems like. The pardoning, like with Trump almost always, like we thought for sure, all the way until January 21st that, he may get a pardon.
Sure.
I mean, we just, so that obviously why would I want to speak out when you think potentially this guy may be, out, and being capable of what he's capable of, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be something that I hope for you guys, and I won't speak for Curtis here, but I hope personally that this shit gets buried under Leavenworth somewhere, because it's not fair to you guys to be subject to the actions of an individual. and it's not fair to subject soldiers to the actions of people that are way outside their realm of responsibility and their control. You know, you guys were there, you were doing your job, you were doing it pretty damn good from what I can gather, and you know, you got nothing but respect from us for just buckling down and getting it done. Because
I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, you guys were in a tight spot, and you know, if that deployment would have, you know, been through its full iteration, it would have been a pretty hardcore, rough deployment for you guys. So you were doing the work, you know.
Right.
And it's a shame that this person has essentially taken the narrative away from you, and that narrative is not allowed to reach its natural conclusion. And so, you know, on that behalf, sorry for you guys, man. But also, you know, view this thing as something that is a part of your past, but it's not a definition, right? Doesn't have to define you guys. Doesn't have to determine who you are, what you were when you were there, when you did your job and you did it well. And it doesn't have to determine what you are going forward, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we always do at the end of these is to give everybody a chance to speak their mind. You guys have, you know, you've had more or less a chance to do that, but if there's anything you want to say, anything we haven't covered, anything that you want to just kind of get out there, we give you guys, you know, your chance to do so. So take it away and tell us what's up.
Go ahead, dude.
I'd like to talk about how I was able to cope.
Sure.
You know, a lot of people, you know, there's a lot of, I mean, going through something like that is just awful, right? And like, especially when you're in the position of, you know, you've seen those kids before, right? Like you've interacted with those locals before, you've interacted with Bobby, you know what I mean? You're just really close to it, and it always keeps coming back up. So one of the things was really a blessing for me was actually going to S3, because the new leadership that came in were outstanding, right? So I worked for Sergeant Major Robert Fortenberry, and he's also one of the guys, the oldest Ranger graduate. He graduated Ranger School like 44 years old. So he's kind of like an inspirational hero. And right now he's got a pretty awesome job. He's about to retire. So it was honestly him allowing me lots of space and not putting me right back into a line unit. Like if I had gone back to a line unit, I would have spun sideways, man, because I just wouldn't have been able to, like, I wouldn't have been able to do what Chong did. You know what I mean? Like there's no way I would have been able to do that. And like, for me, that was key because he opened my eyes to, okay, the Army is way bigger than this one unit, which is my experience, right?
Sure.
This has been the sum of my experience, this one unit. And he was basically like, hey, go try to get in Hawaii. And so when I got to Hawaii, that was when everything changed for me, I would say, because I was put in as a E5 team leader. So,
Sure.
You know what I mean? I showed up as an E5 team leader and I was like ready to go. And it was like a completely different page for me. So what I did is I just invested everything I had, all of these uncertainties, all of these lessons learned, all of this, like we call it trauma, I guess nowadays. It's probably woke to say that, but all of this trauma, and put it in and just box it up, and just I try to put it into bettering myself, like literally being the NCO and being the leader that I wanted to have, right? And so that mentality allowed me to grow and learn so much more about myself, allowed me to go to different schools and really explore the full spectrum of what the Army could offer me as an individual, which I try to put in my practice every day now as a civilian. So it was because of those experiences, getting to go and do different things, because of that one basically transitional touch point, that one transformational moment I had in my life where it was like, hey, you're gonna, you know, stick this thing out, don't give up on the Army, and keep trying. Cause it was been too easy to get out of the Army and just have my head down and like walk around and tell this story 100 times to everyone that would listen to me, and like wear a CIB hat and like talk, you know, like ask me about Bob, you know what I mean? Just have my own Wikipedia page or something like that. You know what I mean? Right. And that's, you know, I tried to move on from it, but I really feel like I needed to address it. And that was the reason for doing this, is just because like we talked about, it it comes up all the time. It came up in boards I would have, like, Sergeant Major's looking at my ERB, and it's like, hey, you only have 5 months deployed, man. What happened there? How do you have a CIB? What unit were you from? Right? Because they want to know. Sergeant Major's not going to promote someone that, it's like, hey, man, what, like, did you ditch out on a deployment? You know what I mean? So then you basically tell the story. And so, like, you just tell it from front to back, like, hey, this is what happened. And, it has its merits in that regard, because it's able to humanize you in some way. But and
what are you doing now, man?
I'm a graduate student at the University of Washington. I built some pretty cool GIS products that you guys will see. And I'm going to be working for a local management company here in the Seattle area coming up. So by the time this interview drops, I'll probably be out of school. So yeah.
Nice.
Oh, early congratulations then, man. That's
Absolutely.
one thing that we really enjoy is bringing guys on, veterans that have found a way to move forward outside of the military, whether it's grad school. Luke has a degree in Chinese language and literature, which I think is still the most unique veteran degree I've seen so far. But I mean,
completely
there's
useful.
Pilots, and there's masters in sociology and psychology and State Department guys. It's just really neat to see people move on.
It's good.
And do really well. So congratulations on completing your degree, finding work, and finding a way to move on, man. It's you've dealt with plenty, and you found a way to channel it and turn it into something else, and that's a good example for our listeners.
Yep.
And Brandon?
All right. Well, so I was one of the unlucky ones. I think I was only one of the 3 that went back to the company.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to go back to the company, and the platoon leadership, the PL and the platoon sergeant, were with our other 2 squads in a completely different VSP. So our relationship was pretty much non-existent. I was almost like a brand new Joe again, I essentially felt like. So I stayed there for about 9 months and then went to Korea. But the whole time I was there, definitely my morale was like below zero. Definitely probably had an alcohol problem. Definitely consumed too much alcohol. Went to Korea, still kind of had an alcohol problem, got into a little bit of trouble. Went to Fort Bragg, got out of Fort Bragg. But just kind of like when I look back on the deployment, it's nothing for me like positive. Like I feel like we didn't clear an area of Taliban. We didn't really lift up these people's lives in any way. If anything, we made it worse. And I look back on that and I just feel bad about it. I feel bad for, I feel like when we talk about this narrative, it's only the Americans, right? We never really go in to the 16 Afghans that were killed. And I feel, when I think about it, I just feel horrible for those people.
Yeah, sure.
I was up in the A&A tower. I got to see their bodies, and it was just something that has really bothered me for a long time. But I'm with my better half now, and she definitely helped me with a lot of things, and I'm very thankful for her. But overall, I think it affected me pretty negatively because when we were back on Rear D, the rest of our platoon, the rest of our company, the rest of our battalion was still in Afghanistan. And while they were there, our the other 2 squads in our platoon, we lost the dude. We lost one of our guys from our platoon while we were at home. So just the whole situation just made me I just feel embarrassed in the situation that I was a part of something like that. It just kind of has a complete negative effect on me about the military.
Sure.
But I'm over that now. Like, life is good. I have no complaints now. But just kind of like when I look back on the Army, it's just not a positive experience for me personally.
Yeah, that's understandable, man. I mean, I can, there's a whole podcast to be made about my beef with the Army. So I understand that experience. And I would say that a large portion of mine was negative, and I wasn't even subject to the bullshit that you were. So, but I think it's I understand the trauma of what you guys went through was pretty significant, not only in regards to seeing the Afghan civilians and the tragedy of that. I mean, it's a tragedy. It really is. And we're 8,000 miles removed and 9 years now, but in those villages, that's a story that's still told, and those are lives that are still impacted.
And for better or worse, I mean, that is going to be, for those villages, that is the legacy of Americans.
Yeah.
Especially for the ones in those families and those villages, when they say, "Oh, what was it like when the Americans were here?" and they're going to say they killed us.
This is what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they killed us. They killed their children.
Yeah. And for a lot of Afghans, that's the story. they still talk about that. And that I think is that I agree with Luke. I think that's the real tragedy. You know, not taking away from what you guys experienced at all, because it's awful.
Yeah, it's terrible.
I'm alive. Like
you're alive.
I'm alive.
Your
And you
family's
have the
alive.
resources to deal with what happened to you.
Right.
But, we bulldozed Belambie, and we pulled all of our forces out of Panjwai, not even like a year and a half after what happened there.
Yeah.
And we kind of just gave up. If we put all that work, and we caused all that harm. And, obviously there was other stuff that went on, the civ casts and all that kind of stuff. And you just imagine your backyard being a war zone. That's what it was for the people of Panjwai for 8 years. Or 80 years, or however long it's been, but to cause that damage, and then now it's back in the hands of the Taliban. And there's nothing we can do to help those people anymore. We gave them a couple $100,000 and thanked them for their service and apologized for their losses, but
$50,000 to each victim.
Yeah.
That's the cost. That was the cost. That was the determined cost of life, right? Like that was a negotiated price.
Yeah.
And like knowing that in my head, I'll never be able to lose that amount of money to understand that's the amount of money that we decided that each life was worth. Right.
Yeah.
Like we spent $500,000 on to basically, I mean, that's the culture, right? But that's the money that we paid. That was, and when you think about that, you just like.
And that's an important thing to note too, is that we talk about this stuff a lot, about how we pay reparations for damage to buildings and, the loss of lives, but that is culturally normal, that you if you harm somebody, you are expected to make reparations in some form, whether that's the donation of some of your livestock or your land, or fit money, or a bride or something like that. I mean, that's the money itself is just kind of part of that culture. But as an American, that's not part of our culture.
Right.
It's
the
not
amount
like
is paltry at best.
Yeah, any amount
for the U.S. government, and that's just, but you can't buy off death.
No.
It's that's a hell of a price to have to pay. So.
Yeah, it was SGLI. You think about it.
Yeah. It's just.
Well, I mean, how are they only worth 50,000? But if you get smoked, you're worth 500.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was the exact conversation that Bales had in our room. Make sure we have to do these wills, these SGLIs, because if you guys get killed, I don't want to be responsible for you guys not giving your families the money. And it's like, okay, I appreciate that. Looking out for me.
Yeah, and not to give him any credit at all, but if you're watching this and you're a soldier and you're in and you haven't done that, you need to do it.
Yeah,
you need to make sure even if you don't have any family, make sure it's made out to your parents, not your girlfriend. Definitely not your girlfriend.
Don't worry, the
boys
away, ship's going to come after it when they repossess the Camry anyway. So
yeah,
Boys and Girls Club, United Way, give them the money, donate it.
Do something with it.
Donate it. You could change somebody's life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I want to say my piece, and then we'll give Luke a chance to close it out. I am thankful that you guys reached out to us to give us the opportunity to tell your story. I hope that we've managed to help you tell it in the way that you envisioned it being told, and that you are comfortable and happy with the result. And obviously, if you're not, we'll make some edits, or you'll just never listen to it, or you just give us a 1-star review on Apple iTunes or something. But in all seriousness, we really appreciate you coming to us and trusting us to tell this story. Even the kind of the new information aside, just the opportunity to express what it was like to be witness to something like that. Probably one of the most historic events of the war in Afghanistan. It's right up alongside there with the initial invasion and Operation Anaconda, Tora Bora. I mean, it's there. It's one of the stories. So we appreciate you giving us the opportunity to help you tell that. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that was the legacy of your deployment. Because as Luke said, it could have been so much more. But I also want to caution you against resting on the fact that was the only thing that came out of it. we were talking before and how many troops, how many contacts that you had and the connections that you guys made with the ODA and your insight into how the war was being fought in 2012 is unique. And there's a lot of people, ourselves included, that didn't get that perspective. So I don't want you to frame that entire deployment simply on the actions of one douchebag. I hope that as you guys mature and move on with your life, so you can look back and see it framed in other terms as well. Now that we've gone and made a podcast about it. But thank you guys. That's what I really want to say. Is just thank you for the opportunity and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, sure. Man. I mean, ditto to that, and I feel the same way. I really appreciate that you guys had the implicit trust in us to allow you the platform. Again, I hope that we did right by your story. I hope we did right by the civilians on the ground who are on the receiving end of this. I said it earlier, and I don't need to say it again, but I admire the fact that you guys have created lives for yourselves on the back end of this thing, because there's guys who go through a whole deployment and see just like a little bit of combat, and they see a couple fucked up things, whatever, and that defines them for the rest of their lives. What you guys saw was an incredible circumstance, as Curtis alluded to, and the fact that you can come out in the back end of that and be better for it and be better in spite of it is encouraging to me, and it's a lesson to those out there who are dragging their feet and just kind of hunkering down because you saw some combat, whatever, man, like that's cool, but get out and do some good stuff, because there's no reason that you can't get a good job at Intel. There's no reason that you can't keep going to school, because the kind of stuff that's in the shadow of your military service, or rather your military service is in the shadow of, is something that you've negated in your actions. So you have my admiration and my respect for that. So yeah. I think
awesome.
All I got to say is thanks, guys. Thanks for coming on, and we really appreciate it. Really.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for giving us opportunity. For me personally, I had zero intention of ever doing anything like this. It was Alexander that hit me up and convinced me. So I appreciate you guys allowing us on your platform. So.
Oh yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Panjwai Podcast. If you liked what you heard, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. New episodes every Monday on all major podcast platforms, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit www.thepanjwaipodcast.com for more information.